Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Durst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Nita Butler, thank you so much for being on our show today. We're so excited to having the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope my story will be helpful for listeners as they navigate through their own transition.
Nita, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you, air quotes, grew up?
I think I was one of those kids who definitely changed their mind a lot. One day it was dancer, the next minute it was a marine biologist. But I think as I got closer to, college, and I realized that I wanted something in lines with event planning or public relations. Growing up, my parents threw a lot of dinner parties, and I really loved helping them set things up. So I think that was kind of my goal as I was thinking about college and what I wanted to major in.
Nita, what were the transition moments that occurred to get you from that picture of yourself as a young child, as a dancer and a marine biologist, to where you're at today?
Yeah, I think that my background is a bit of a winding road of multiple transitions. So I think the most pivotal moment as far as getting into the event planning world and eventually into marketing was actually at a spin class with my mom. I did something that was incredibly uncharacteristic of me. I tend to be a little bit more on the introverted side, at least especially when I was younger, I definitely was. But our spin instructor had, kept talking about how, she was taking this week off to go work at the Sundance Film Festival and another week off to go work at the Olympics. So I was really curious about what she did outside of being a spin instructor. So after class, I decided to go and talk to her, and I asked her what she did, and she said she was an event planner. And I asked her if she needed an intern, and she said, yeah, I need one this coming summer. So it was actually perfect for me. It was the summer after my junior year of college leading into senior year. I worked with her over the summer. It was really amazing. I got to do an award show with her as well as several weddings. And after I graduated from college, I decided to go and continue working with her. I think that, as much as I enjoyed planning events and, as much as I loved a good wedding, I learned pretty quickly that I think event planning is maybe more of a hobby and not really what I wanted my full-time career to be. So, and I also realized, all of this was taking place in Orange County, California, and I realized that I really wanted to get out of Orange County. So I kind of made a gut decision and moved to San Francisco. And I knew that I wanted a job in a creative environment, and I knew I wanted a job where I was working really closely with people. So I ended up actually starting to work at a branding and innovation agency as their office manager and executive assistant. And that was where my career in brand strategy really blossomed. So I actually, going into it, I'd heard of marketing, but I'd never really heard of brand strategy. And so as the office manager, I would support the team, and I started to get more and more involved in projects. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is really interesting work. And about a year into my time at the agency, I was asked to move into a strategy role. And brand strategy is great. I think it really tapped into a lot of things I'm passionate about. Primarily, I've always really loved digging into human behavior and cultural trends. And I also really love design. So it was really fitting for me at the time. Our job was really about helping companies communicate to their customers. So this really required me to understand, who the customer is and what motivates them. And I think that over time, I had the opportunity, while the customer experience was really my focus, I did have the opportunity to work on some projects that involved more of the employee and the employee experience. And I think just in my relationships with clients and also with my own experience, I started to get more interested in the impact that the employee experience had on a company and a company's success. I feel like there is a gap right now between employee experience and company success. And I think that companies are, they're trying to find ways, to boost morale. And I think they've done a good job of implementing perks like free lunch and unlimited vacation and the ping pong tables and et cetera. And, while those are all well and good, they're very superficial solutions. So I really think there's a huge opportunity to develop more sustainable strategies that are actually designing well-being into the way we work, and I feel like right now, especially as we're going through this pandemic, it's becoming even more important, because I think that line that was already a little bit blurry between work and life has completely faded. So I've been spending, the past year or so working on transitioning from brand strategy, where I was focusing on the customer experience, to a role in human resources, where I will be focusing on the employee experience.
You talked about brand strategy. What does taking care of your personal brand mean to you, and how can we potentially improve that personal brand?
It's a really good question. I think that taking care of your personal brand, I think it's really important to be authentic to who you are. I feel like people will completely see through you if you try to project a brand that's not true to who you are. And I think, that was the same advice we would give clients as far as, their company went. It was like, don't try to be something you're not. Take what you are good at and what you know how to do and do well, and figure out a way to enhance that and elevate it, and find a new, maybe a more unique way of talking about it and expressing it. But the minute you start to try to be something you're not, it's going to fall flat, and you're not going to feel good about it or confident about what you're trying to portray to the world. And I think it's also important to not feel pressure to conform to just what's expected of you. I actually read a really great book recently called The Myth of the Nice Girl. And I think for someone like me, it was really helpful because, as a woman, there is a lot of, I think you feel like you can't be nice in the corporate world and be successful. And that was always really hard for me because, that is more my persona and my brand. And I think it was really great to hear how you can take the great qualities about yourself, even if they're not necessarily what is expected, and you can explain to people how that's going to help them and how that's going to help their business. So I think that would be probably my biggest piece of advice when it comes to your personal brand.
How do you think you would use a professional organization like SHRM or any other organization that you might be a part of? How would you use that to your advantage while you're thinking of making a transition or during your transition?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's really valuable to get involved with these organizations. SHRM is amazing because, they have so many resources for you. And actually, as someone I know, at least in the New York chapter, if you are someone who's thinking about transitioning careers, they'll give you a discounted membership fee, which is really nice as well. They also set up a lot of events, which is a great place to network. I've met several people through the networking events and who have just been so helpful, essentially complete strangers. And because of the times that we're in, people I have never met face to face who are really eager to help. So I think it's definitely important to get involved in those in professional organizations, that whatever organization that is part of the industry that you are trying to get into. I also have been involved with HRCI. They put on different webinars regularly that are really helpful just in getting better familiarized with the industry and what's happening in HR and kind of the evolving trends and how, especially, in the times that we're in, how to navigate those challenges.
Nita, you're transitioning from kind of a work life to back to college. And to juggle that transition has called upon a number of skills that you have had to use, writing skills and other communication skills and time management and so forth. What other skills have you needed to have to be effective in your transition? And have you used any tools or other training to help you be stronger in those skills that you need as a part of that transition?
Basically, the best way to think about it is my transition kind of happened in two parts. I think the first part was, really doing the research to make the switch, right? And, I didn't make this decision lightly. It was something that I had been thinking about for several years. And I'm a person who really goes with my gut, but in this instance, I also really wanted to do my research. So I think that, the first step was, okay, let me get my certification in HR. There's a PHR exam. HRCI also offers an APHR exam, which is the one that I took since I don't have any formal training in HR. And I think that was like a really good foundational understanding of, compliance and the laws and all of that. But, as I'm learning more about the industry and where it's heading and how it's evolving, I think that there is this, misconception that HR is just the compliance police. But I think there's this really exciting shift that's happening in the industry right now. And I think especially with the pandemic, it's giving us this whole new perspective of the role that HR plays. It is starting to become this much more strategic position that is having a bigger seat at the table and is working more on, helping a company really achieve their objectives and their goals, and all through the lens of the employee. So my decision to go back to school was because I want to be on the, cusp of that. I want to be part of that forward-thinking shift that's happening. So I think the certification was great. I think it was really valuable as like an initial step. But I think that the getting further education, as HR as a strategic role is like really going to be helpful in the long run as this industry continues to evolve.
Nita, I'm sure that you have friends, relatives that said, oh my goodness, you had a great job. We're dealing with brand strategy. How could you leave that to go back to school? How do you answer that question?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's actually pretty interesting. I was a little nervous about telling people. I think that you always worry what people are going to think, and being in your 30s, it's scary to make this change. Like, I'm not going to lie. There's been plenty of times where I'm like, oh, maybe I should just go back. But, I need to do what feels right for me. And I think that, my friends and family understand that. I will say that, on one hand, it was interesting because the number of people who said to me when I told them I was making a career change that, oh my gosh, I'm so jealous. I wish I could do that. Or, man, I've been really wanting to do that, but I don't know how to go about it. I was really shocked, primarily people at my age, but it just goes to show that, I don't think that I'm alone in this desire. I think your 30s are kind of that time of self-reflection, if you will. And I remember even reading this article kind of at the beginning of this when I was like, Nita, what are you doing with yourself? This is crazy. And it put it really in great perspective to me of, you've only been working for about 10 years. You've got, assuming you work the rest of your life, you got about another 30 years to go. And that was really eye-opening for me and just made me feel a lot more confident. And I think that my family and friends really understand that I'm trying to set myself up for, the long term. And I think also I'm lucky to have people who are in the industry that I'm really close with. I have a family member who actually transitioned herself. She was a lawyer and then she moved into HR. And I was also very fortunate to have a very strong relationship with my past HR director. So, having their support as well was really helpful. When I told them, they were immediately like, oh, yes, like this makes sense for you. I completely understand it. And I think the last thing I'll say about it is that I wouldn't say I'm leaving brand strategy behind. I don't, just because it won't be my role anymore. I think that there's so many beneficial skills that I learned as a brand strategist that totally apply and can be utilized for a role in HR. So I don't think of it as necessarily completely like leaving that behind me. It's just, how do I take what I've learned and apply it to this thing that I'm incredibly passionate about?
Nita, you used the line, I need to do what is right for me, which leads you to the question of who do you think is responsible for your career and how do you manage that career?
I mean, at the end of the day, the person responsible for your career is you. You do have to do like I said, you do have to do what's right for you. And you have to be the one who is asking yourself the question, is this the career I want? Is this the career I imagined for myself? What do I want this career to look like down the road? And am I tracking to reach that goal? So I think, it's always comes down to you and you can make it what you want it to be. And I think the interesting thing with the time we're living in right now is that, I go online and I look at all these positions and there's so many unique positions. I don't think that you have to take a normal track anymore. I think that, if you want to go down the road of being an individual contributor, like that's totally fine as well. I think you just, again, you have to do what feels right for you. We spend so much time at work. I think it's about a third of our lives. So in my mind, it's like, why be stuck with something that doesn't feel right or doesn't make you feel fulfilled?
You mentioned that you had a friend that went from being a lawyer to an HR person and they helped supply support and counsel and mentoring to you. Oftentimes when we are in transition, we do have to ask others for assistance and for their support. But many of us asking the question, asking for their advice, for their support is difficult to do. We feel guilty. We feel that we're imposing on their time. We don't want to be a bother, but we need their advice. How do you get over that guilt, that hesitancy to ask the question and get their support in your transition?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think this is something I struggle with a lot. And like I said too, I tend to have more introverted tendencies. I think as I've gotten older and I've moved past them more, I think you can think about it two ways. I think one, it's important to remember that the worst thing that someone can do is either say nothing or say no. And I think that's always really helped me to think about it that way. It's like the worst they can do is say no if you reach out to them. And yeah, that, kind of sucks, but they're probably not the right person to help you anyway. But I think also the other thing I think about is that if someone reached out to me seeking help and advice, I would be really excited to help them in any way I could. And I think I just try to maintain that mindset as well. And I think it can be very flattering when someone reaches out to you and seeks your advice. That means that they think you're valuable and they, they want your advice. They want your opinion on something, which I think is something to keep in mind. So, when you're reaching out to someone, just can think about the fact that it could actually make them feel really special, which is always nice.
How does time management skills help you or present challenges as you're going through this transition right now?
Well, that's a really great question. I think time management is incredibly important. I'm someone who loves my calendar. Going through a transition and job hunting, it's tiring. It can be a full-time job in itself. So I think it's important to set realistic expectations for yourself. Don't try to take too much on, maybe decide I'm going to apply to X amount of jobs a day and like that's what I can manage and that's enough for me. I try to make my days just like a 9 to 5 job. It's really helpful in keeping me motivated and keeping me focused and on track. So I think it's really important to manage your time, especially if you're making this transition like myself when you're not working. I will say the other thing too is to make sure you're finding something to put your time towards outside of just the transition. And it could be something that is helping with the transition. So I actually applied for a volunteer position with the American Red Cross where I am helping them, helping their HR team. It's nice because I also have a balance too, which tends to help with the time management as well, because I know when I need to focus on the volunteer stuff and when I need to focus on my school applications and when I need to focus on applying for a job. So yeah, I would highly recommend almost treating it like you're going to a job, your regular 9 to 5 day, and really sectioning off that time in a way that's going to make you efficient and effective. Because like I said, if you try and take on too much, it's going to be really hard to manage your time.
Nita, you said that transition management is tiring, scary, time consuming. How do you keep those gremlins that we all have out of your head? The gremlins that whisper to you, what are you doing? You're not smart enough to make this transition. You're too old. You're too, whatever it is. How do you keep them out of your head?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think just to back up a little bit, I think it's really, really important to remember, and this is what my therapist tells me all the time, is remember to be kind to yourself. You've just made this big decision, and the worst thing you can do is start to be critical of yourself. I think that is really important. I think it's also important to just take the time you need when you're starting to feel like those gremlins are chattering away in your ear. I think that's the moment where it's like, all right, we need to take a pause. We need to take a minute and just not feel like we need to just go, 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 go all the time, right? And I think when we feel that pressure, because there is immense pressure to just kind of like keep at it, I feel like that's when the gremlins kind of start to show their face. So I think it's good. It's important to remember to just like sometimes take a pause. And like I said, it's again, setting realistic expectations for yourself. Like I remember I had a week where I was just like, I can't job hunt anymore. And I just decided to take the week off, almost like a vacation. I think that's really important. And I think the last thing is also just reach out to your people, to your support system. It's always nice to hear, their point of view, because they'll remind you you're great, you're amazing, you're valuable. You have all these great skills. And, that's what your friends and family are there for. So I think those are ways to kind of keep the gremlins at bay, if you will. And just remember that this is something that you're doing for yourself. I think a lot of times we get a little lost because it's, we forget that our careers are about us. Yes, it's about helping an organization be successful and achieve their goals and contribute to something. But at the end of the day, it really is about us. And so I think that it's important to remember that as well.
Nita, whether you're in your transition or in your career or at college, LinkedIn and other social media are available to you. How should you use those tools to help you build your career?
Yeah, I think that LinkedIn can be really valuable. I'm still learning how to best use it, but I think make sure it's up to date and make sure your story is on there. Explain, what your goal is, what you're trying to achieve. But I think it's extremely helpful when it comes to networking. Like I said, I met all these people in these networking events and immediately, connected with them on LinkedIn. And I was very shocked again by how many people, wanted to help. So I think that LinkedIn can be really valuable. I think that networking is super important, and I understand it can be a little unnerving, a little scary, but it's like I said, the worst thing that could happen is someone's going to say, they might not respond to you, or they might say no, which I've had that happen, and you just move on to the next and find someone who does want to help, and hope that one day you can help them in return. So I definitely think that LinkedIn is really valuable during a period of transition.
Nita, if you were talking with other introverted people about the whole subject of networking and you shared one really great piece of advice, what's the worst that can happen that they say no? What would be the other advice that you would give those introverts to help them make the networking process work for them?
I think that the other thing I would say is think of it in the exciting way of just meeting somebody new. I think we put a lot of pressure on it, which is understandable because we want to look good and we want to be professional, and I think that's really important. But getting a chance to meet someone new, and I think that even as an introvert, I think that's exciting. You get to pick somebody's brain, you get to ask their advice, you get to hear their story. So I think it's just taking a little bit of that pressure off for it to necessarily be this incredibly transactional experience. Also helps too.
Nita, any resources, tools, books that you've read that you would recommend for someone who is going through a transition that you think would help them out?
Yeah, so I've used quite a few things. I think that Indeed has a lot of really great articles that have been super helpful for me. They also have a lot of webinars to help people who are in transition or who are just like on the job hunt. I love podcasts like Brene Brown's Unlocking Us is a really great podcast, just as far as I think getting yourself in the right mindset. I also used a career coach as I was just kind of validating where I was planning on going with my career. And I thought that was really helpful. I think I found someone who specializes specifically in transitioning careers, and it was just good to get an outside objective from somebody that doesn't really know you quite well, but can give you some advice and guidance as you're moving forward. So I think that those were, but I will say Indeed is where I've spent a lot of my time. I think they do really have some really great resources, just as far as advice on your resume, your cover letter, how to network. I think they actually have an article specifically for networking for introverts. So it's been a really great resource for me.
Nita, what are the 3 things you want our listeners to remember from what you told them today?
I think that the 3 things are listen to your gut, but do your research and set your goals. I think the gut can be very helpful, but you also don't want to be totally aimless in your transition quest. I think the other 2 would be, don't be afraid to fail or make a change. Be okay with being uncomfortable. I think it's very instinctual for all of us to fall back on what makes us comfortable. And just because it's comfortable doesn't really mean it's going to make you happy in the long run. So I think just live in that discomfort for a little bit and just remember that it's temporary. It's not going to last forever. And what comes out in the end is going to be better than where you were. And then I think lastly, and this was something that a manager told me a really long time ago, remember that getting to know what you don't like is just as important as figuring out what you do like. Don't think of it as a setback or regret a decision you made. Instead, learn from it, recognize it, and understand that by identifying these things, you're only getting closer to what you really want.
Nita Butler, I know I can speak for all the listeners. What great thoughts, what great feelings, what exciting career advice that you shared. And I thank you for caring enough about others and helping them make their transition go efficiently and maybe even painlessly, but as well being willing to be vulnerable and share those thoughts with them. I want to make certain that you know how much we appreciate it, and thank you so, so much.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.